Good morning, everyone. It's Monday, March 29th, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kim Mo-gen. Before we get started, these are the stories we're following at the top of the hour. Beginning today, South Korea will implement a new set of COVID-19 prevention measures for the next 2 weeks. The revised rules include a ban on eating in certain public places and a mandatory QR code-based registration to enter facilities. Following air attacks by the army on an area held by an ethnic armed group, about 3,000 villagers from Myanmar's southeastern Karen state fled to Thailand on Sunday. And South Korea is witnessing some of the worst air quality levels ever seen in the nation today, as for the first time in 6 years, the Korean Meteorological Administration issued a yellow dust warning for all of Seoul. Our top story today, South Korea confirmed 384 new cases of COVID-19, a decline from recent days, but still on the high side. Hoping to curb the rising numbers, the government has implemented a ban on eating in certain public places and mandatory QR code-based registration to enter facilities. Our Choi Jung-in starts us off.
No more popcorns in movie theaters, nor a simple cup of coffee in the library. One should now avoid eating in public places in South Korea or face a possible fine, as the government has adopted a new set of prevention measures. It applies to 21 places, including sports arenas, museums, private cram schools, PC rooms, and saunas. Previously, eating inside was allowed under social distancing levels 2 and 1.5. While the current systems will remain the same for another 2 weeks, the revised rule bans eating regardless of the level. However, there are exceptions. For instance, if a museum or other facility has a designated area for eating, like a cafe or restaurant, or when private partitions are installed in PC rooms to keep people apart. After a 1-week grace period, violators will be fined 100,000 won or around $90. On top of the no eating policy, entry to entertainment facilities like pubs, bars, and nightclubs will require an individual digital QR log. Submitting an individual phone number and address were mandatory, meaning that conventionally one person in the group could representatively provide the information. Now, each person in the group must write or submit a QR code to enter. Additionally, more thorough temperature checks will be conducted to restrict people with COVID-19 symptoms from entering, while there will be a person in charge of making sure the rules are enforced. To try and stem the spread, health authorities have extended until April 11th the Level 2 social distancing in the Seoul metropolitan area and Level 1.5 in the rest of the country. That means the ban on private gatherings of 5 or more people remains in place, with certain exceptions only, like pre-wedding gatherings of the bride and groom's families, which can include up to 8 people. Choi Jung-yun, Arirang News.
Health authorities in South Korea have decided to introduce COVID-19 vaccine leave from April to allow people suffering side effects to take up to 2 days off work without a doctor's note. The decision on Sunday comes after a meeting between health officials earlier in the day. Last week, the Ministry of Health and Welfare said it would recommend workers to take unpaid time off without having to use their regular leave. As of Sunday, more than 10,300 cases of post-vaccine side effects were reported, but the overwhelming majority were mild. A U.S. top disease expert has warned that the country will witness a growing number of COVID-19 cases as several states decided to ease restrictions. Now, meanwhile, in Japan is already facing a rebound in its caseload after a state of emergency was lifted a week ago. Our Choi Min-jung reports.
The United States top infectious disease expert has warned that the country is in danger of facing another surge of COVID-19. Speaking to CBS on Sunday, the chief medical advisor to the president, Dr. Anthony Fauci, said the level of infection in the U.S. had plateaued at 50 to 60,000 new cases per day, but the country is starting to witness upticks in numbers. Much like what has happened in European countries, Fauci said that when the number of new cases reaches a point and starts to plateau, cases will sprout again. The expert pointed out that while COVID-19 variants play a part in the uptick, the easing of COVID-19 restrictions is what drives the rise. Fauci expressed concerns over the loosened restrictions in several states, calling them premature. He added that if the U.S. maintains vaccinations for 3 to 3.5 million people every day, the infection rate will be brought down to a much lower level. Meanwhile, Japan is already witnessing rebounds in COVID-19 cases after a state of emergency was lifted a week ago. According to local news outlet NHK, the country on Sunday reported almost 1,800 cases nationwide. This is the highest figure recorded for a Sunday in 8 weeks. Many people were seen at commercial areas as well as parks enjoying the cherry blossoms. Under the state of emergency, which ended last week, the country's caseload had been declining since hitting record highs in January. But the recent uptick indicates that the country is likely to transition into the fourth wave of the pandemic. Meanwhile, in Europe, the first vaccine passports will be available this summer in both digital and paper formats. According to the head of the European Commission Vaccines Task Force, the health passport will be made available for EU nations. It will contain personal information and show whether people have received shots against the virus. With the passport to be implemented in June, the head added travel across Europe will soon resume. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai says Washington is not ready to remove tariffs on Chinese imports in the near future. She says they'll maintain them even though it costs American consumers and businesses. Our Ji-young has more details.
The Biden administration is not likely to remove tariffs on Chinese imports anytime soon, but might be open to trade negotiations with Beijing. This is according to U.S. Trade Representative Katherine Tai on Sunday in her first interview since her Senate confirmation. The former Trump administration imposed tariffs on $370 billion of goods per year on 25% of Chinese imports. Tai told the Wall Street Journal that Washington is not ready to lift tariffs even though she recognizes that maintaining them is costly to U.S. businesses and consumers. She said lifting tariffs could hit the U.S. economy if it's not communicated in a way before any adjustments are made for actors in the economy. She also said proponents say the tariffs shield companies from subsidized foreign competition. She added she's reluctant to lift tariffs due to tactical reasons for negotiations. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Saturday slammed China's retaliatory sanctions imposed on American and Canadian officials, saying they're baseless. He said the U.S. condemns China's baseless sanctions on two U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom commissioners, apparently in retaliation for U.S. sanctions on PRC officials connected with serious human rights abuse in Xinjiang. This comes amid tensions between China over its treatment of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang province. Also sanctioned were Canadian officials as well as 8 members of the committee's subcommittee on international human rights. Chinese citizens and businesses cannot communicate with them and they are not allowed to enter China, Hong Kong, or Macau. Ji-young, Arirang News.
North Korea on Monday accused the United Nations Security Council of double standards as the council is meeting this week to discuss last week's missile launches. In a statement released by the North Saeran news agency, the Director General of the North Korean Foreign Ministry's International Organization Department, Cho Chol-soo, said he strongly denounced the moves as a serious infringement on the dignity and sovereignty of an independent state. Also, apparently referring to the recent South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises, to criticize the UNSC for remaining silent on war drills against the North. He added that any attempt to infringe upon the North's right to self-defense would prompt a countermeasure. Now, over in Myanmar, following air attacks on an area controlled by an ethnic armed group, thousands of villagers from Myanmar's southeast have fled to Thailand. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
According to the Karen Women's Organization on Sunday, about 3,000 villagers from Myanmar's southeastern state of Karen have fled to Thailand after the army launched airstrikes on the area that's held by an armed ethnic group. The organization says the military launched the airstrikes on 5 areas in Ma Tra district, located near the Myanmar-Thailand border, including on a displacement camp. The Karen National Union, the armed ethnic group that controls the regions, says the military dropped bombs on villages, killing 3 people and injuring several others. The airstrikes are the first significant attack on the region since the KNU signed a ceasefire agreement in 2015. However, tensions rose when the KNU's chairman wrote an open letter to Myanmar Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing, condemning the coup as well as the events that followed, including violence against protesters. The strikes also come as the country saw its bloodiest weekend since the coup. At least 114 people were killed on Saturday, as well as 9 more on Sunday. Violence occurred in at least 40 townships on Saturday as they marked Armed Forces Day, commemorating the Army's fight against Japan in 1945. There were also reports of 40 houses in Mandalay being burned, as well as a neighborhood watch member being burned alive after being shot. The military junta marked the day with a parade in Naypyidaw, where coup leader Min Aung Hlaing promised to hold fresh elections and oversee a transition to democracy. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The paralyzing effect of the Suez Canal, which transits some 15% of the world's shipping traffic, is becoming clearer by the day. The ship blocking the waterway has been hindering global shipping and trade since last Tuesday. Our Kim Hyo-sun with more.
Egypt is reportedly losing 12 to 14 million US dollars in revenue each day from the Suez Canal as one of the world's biggest waterways remains blocked. Explaining that this is just an estimate, the head of the Suez Canal Authority added, no clear timetable can be given for when the 400-meter-long Ever Given, the ship wedged diagonally across the southern section, can be finally moved.
We can't give an estimated time to solve this problem. As I said, it's a cargo ship with a heavy load, and in shallow water depth, as I said, we don't know. With the pulling and pushing and the drilling process, we don't know how the ship will behave.
The authorities also explained that some cargo may be unloaded if continued efforts to free the ship are unsuccessful. Adding that nearly 370 vessels are waiting to transit the canal, they also said discounts may be provided for affected vessels. The paralyzing effect is becoming clearer as nearby Syria has imposed fuel rationing to safeguard its dwindling oil supplies. Syrian authorities say the blockage has hindered oil supplies to the country, delaying the arrival of an oil tanker. Out of the millions of tons of cargo currently backed up in the Suez Canal, none are more delicate than the animals crammed into several vessels. According to Bloomberg, as many as 14 vessels could be carrying thousands of livestock, many being sheep. To this end, Egyptian authorities have dispatched veterinarians, saying 3 teams were sent as of Sunday. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
Housing prices across the globe are sharply inflating. According to the OECD, home prices in its 37-member countries hit record highs in the third quarter of last year. The prices rose among 5% on year, marking the fastest increase in nearly 20 years. The Wall Street Journal reported that inflating global housing prices and raising concerns over a potential bubble in the market and prompting some governments to intervene to avoid their markets from becoming overheated. The report noted that low interest rates pushed up housing demand, and the aftermath of COVID-19, including the need to work from home, have also contributed to the rise. South Korea is witnessing some of the worst air quality levels ever seen in the nation this morning. For the first time in 6 years, the Korea Meteorological Administration issued a yellow dust warning for all of Seoul. This comes after a fine dust and an ultra fine dust advisory was issued across various parts of the country earlier this morning due to gusts of yellow dust flowing in from Mongolia and China. The air quality is considered very bad when there are more than 151 micrograms of fine dust per cubic meter. But the concentration in many regions, including Seoul, spiked above 500 micrograms. The government has advised people with respiratory and cardiovascular problems, as well as young children, to stay home.
Good morning. The season's worst yellow dust storm has hit Korea. A warning was being issued in central regions earlier in the morning, including here in the capital for the first time in 6 years. And now yellow dust warning has expanded to southern regions about an hour ago as well. And what's more, ultrafine dust also blew in, boosting dust levels to very unhealthy levels nationwide. And dust levels are about 10 times higher than normal. So please have a face mask that can block the fine dust, and let's try to stay indoors today. Temperature-wise, the highs will climb 3 to 6 degrees higher than yesterday. Southern regions will notice the highs reaching into the 20s by the afternoon. Mostly sunny skies will be blurred out by toxic dust. It's very likely we'll be dealing with more polluted air for the next few days, along with warmer temperatures. Then rain is in the forecast this weekend. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the weather conditions around the world.
And that will do it for us at this hour on Arirang News. We'll be back with more of the day's headlines at noon Korea time, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.